Welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Commercial Real Estate 101 Meetup Group. For those of you guys who are tuning in for the first time, we started this back in 2020, somewhat in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but I just felt there wasn't as much resources out there pertaining to just learning about the commercial real estate industry. And so we just started doing these bi-monthly meetings where we started to reach out to people from all across the country to learn about a variety of different commercial real estate topics. And today we have a good buddy of mine, Logan Hartl, who's a commercial agent in North Carolina, to stop by to talk about a very important topic, in particular now that, we're starting to go and we're starting to see, recessionary concerns coming into play. I think it's going to be ever more crucial for us to, refine our prospecting efforts. So I think it's going to be great to learn more about how you approach the process, Logan. So welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me. This is cool. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I know. We're excited to have you. And for those of you guys who don't know, actually, I connected with Logan just through this stuff. We do a lot of, virtual stuff, and we just so happen to connect because we're all content creators on in the commercial real estate realm. And so we've just been in touch ever since, and we've done, things together here and there, and just excited, again, like I said, to host you today to talk a little bit about prospecting. So one of the things that we typically like to do when we first get started is we like to learn a little bit more about the person who's, across the table from us. So if you don't mind kind of sharing your backstory, I think that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. So yeah. So I am by training, much like you, I'm by education, I'm an industrial engineering major out of college. Left that and spent about 10 years in manufacturing. I went to the West Virginia University for that and spent most of my manufacturing tenure in West Virginia. The last 5 years of that tenure, I actually owned my own manufacturing company. So I bought a hand tool manufacturing company with two partners of mine. We ended up selling that company back in 2020 and kept the real estate. I've always been fascinated with real estate. I've always loved real estate. Read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was 18 and just immediately was hooked to it. I have family that's in the residential real estate side of things. So just kind of grew up with it and was always around it. And I knew when I sold that business that real estate was what I wanted to do with my life, both on the investment side and day to day as a broker. So, for me, the options were out there. Do I start a new business? Do I go work for somebody? I had been doing some residential and some commercial brokerage for myself for a couple of months, 3 or 4 months by the time we had sold that business, and just decided to go full time and just head first into that. And it's been a great decision. I've loved it ever since, and currently live in the Charlotte market. I'm in the Charlotte area. I live about 20 minutes north of the city, but work all over the North and South Carolina, trying to help investors find commercial real estate investments. So that's primarily me and where I came from and where I'm at now.
Awesome. Yeah. Like you mentioned, I actually studied this. We talk about this all the time, but I studied industrial engineering too, and minored in economics, and then got into the software space. So, talk a little bit about that transition, because that's another thing is the question that I get all the time is like, why make that jump? Because it seems somewhat, kind of foreign to a lot of people.
It is. I mean, I think you got to have the right mentality as an engineer. I think industrial engineers in general tend to be a little bit more business minded and business focused. They go into it, and this is just my thought process. A lot of industrial engineers that I know aren't necessarily the type of engineers that are interested in designing products or design, in the intricacies of hardcore design. But they love the business world, and they love to look at processes and re-engineering processes and making things more efficient and more effective. And I think that lends itself really well to the business world. But what it doesn't teach you and what you don't learn in that space is sales. And that's something that I've had to fall on my face over and over and over again to learn. Spend a lot of time listening to seminars, reading books, things like that, and trying to tweak that and just become a better salesperson. So that's probably the biggest transition and probably the biggest, I don't want to say hiccup, but the biggest roadblock, I would say, from transitioning from an engineering role, or maybe any role really, that's not sales related, into the brokerage world, or into any sort of business realm really, is you have to have that sales ability. If you have a startup business or if you're trying to get into the brokerage world, you have to be able to sell. So that was probably the biggest hurdle for me.
Yeah, no, I it's similar to me. I mean, the same with you. I mean, I I had no sales experience prior to that. I mean, like you said, in college, there's really not a lot of focus on that, obviously, because your
Hmm.
discipline is more so related to process engineering, which again, that does help immensely in a variety of different ways, and we'll touch on a little bit later as you built out your systems, how you've been able to
Yep.
manage that process. But from the sales side of things, you're right. I mean, it's definitely and sales you can't learn by reading it in a book. I mean, you can learn certain techniques, but a lot of it is just getting out there and falling on your face, like you've mentioned in the past. So one thing I wanted to ask you was related to the process of getting into the prospecting mode, essentially, because
Yeah.
when a lot of people first start out, it's one of those things that's kind of somewhat daunting. First off, you don't even know where to go as far as sourcing some of that information. And so, if you could
Yep.
touch on, where you were able to access some of the information to be able to
Sure.
begin the process, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So it is a very daunting, very, very daunting task to get started in the world of prospecting. Not only the thought process of just cold outreach, there's a mental aspect to get over with that we can touch on as well. But there's a very big organizational component to that, where you can't just look up somebody, make a phone call, not take any notes, not keep track of anything, and then move on to the next, or you won't be very effective. So for me, we had some processes, or not some processes, but we had some tools at our firm, primarily Reonomy and CoStar, that were vital for me for gathering that data and getting information. And for me, I'm an industrial and investment sales broker, so I focus on the industrial space. So I was able to utilize those tools to compile lists of owners in the area around specific types of criteria that I was looking for. And that was really the tool. But there's it's pretty accessible to find access to those lists, whether you're utilizing one of those services or you're hiring someone. I more recently hired someone on Fiverr to go compile a list for me that's kind of a specific niche area around one of my listings, so I can start to hit people around my listings and try to A, sell that, but and B, pick up more listings. But that information is relatively available. You got to pay for it, but it's relatively available out there. But it's what you do with that that's really going to make you effective or not. So, it took me a while to really build a system out around that and keeping track of that. Initially, it was spreadsheets, and I was keeping track of everything in spreadsheets. And more recently, over the last year, I've developed that system into more of a CRM-based management system. So I'm putting everything into my CRM. I'm setting follow-up reminders for leads that either are warm leads or leads that I've touched base with. And then I use a dialer. I do a lot of cold calling. We've talked about this in the past. I do a lot of cold calling and cold email outreach. And so I have one software that I utilize that helps me organize different email campaigns. And I have another, the CRM, I have a dialer that I have attached to that helps me with keeping track of all the dials that I make. It'll automatically pull all those leads and dials out into that software and import back into the software, call times and any notes that I make, so on and so forth. So I don't have to do that double entry. And so I've started to implement some of those tools into my business, and it's been very helpful.
Oh, I can only imagine. Yeah. And we'll dive into some of the systems just so people can kind of get an idea of how you structure that. But going
Yeah.
next up is, you mentioned the starting point. So, similar to you, when I first got started, I utilized CoStar primarily. And then, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I would just literally, took a big list of properties. Our brokers did a lot on the retail side. So I do a bunch of retail buildings, and I just started calling people and said, hey, I'm so-and-so with this group, and, we're commercial brokers in the area, and I just want to introduce myself to see if you ever had any, commercial real estate service needs in the future.
Yep.
And that's all I did down the list. And, it was very long and cumbersome as far as the process was concerned. But, that I gained a little bit of traction doing that, but I'm sure there's other ways you can approach or structure a call to see if you can maximize,
Sure.
the value you receive from it. So if you could kind of share with us, what is your approach before you reach out to someone, and then during the call, how do you structure it so that you try to, extract as much valuable information as possible?
Sure. So in the investment space, as you can probably all imagine, investors typically, some of them are handed properties when someone passes, but a lot of the folks who are there bought it and understand the investment world, right? So they may have 10 different properties, 20 different properties they're going to buy and sell throughout the year, throughout the as a property is ready to sell, they're going to sell it. So long story short, I started contacting investors and asking them what they wanted. So from the brokerage world, I started reaching out to private equity groups. I started reaching out to REITs. I started reaching out to these larger groups that had cash and were buying up a lot of assets, and said, what is it that you're looking for? And let me find that for you. And a majority of those are not going to hire you as an exclusive buyer's rep, which is okay, which is fine with me. They if you bring them the deal, you're going to get paid. And that's kind of how I started to build an idea. And I probably talked to 50, 60, 100 different groups and started to build this sense of the market of what are people looking to buy. And that's what I tailored my list to. So I like that approach because now when I call an owner of a property, I have folks who are ready to buy that property if it makes sense. And so it makes that conversation a little bit easier. But as I said, these are oftentimes investors. So we'll jump into a few different groups that I call on, but in the investment group that I call on, a majority of the time they're looking for more assets as well. So I typically start that conversation the same way I did with the private equity groups. I started with, hey, my name's Logan Hartle, just reaching out to touch base. I see you own 123 Main Street. And they say, yep. You're usually very standoffish at first. Yeah, what do you want? They're thinking I'm going to try to sell them something. And I usually say, well, a lot of folks like you own a lot of those properties and are looking for more. Are you still acquiring those assets? And then their ears kind of perk up because most people in that investment space are looking for more assets. And they'll say, yeah, we are. We're continuing to buy. Every once in a while, you get someone that just doesn't want to talk to you and will say no. But, from a broker's perspective, investors want good relationships with brokers because brokers bring them good deals. So when you phrase it like that and you start with that, they tend to open up a little bit more because now you're bringing value. Hey, if I were to find you the right deal, what would that look like for you? And they'll typically give me that criteria as well, just like the REITs and just like the big private equity groups do. And I'll say, okay, great. And then, if you needed to sell that, or do you need to sell any of your properties in order to buy this new asset that you want to buy? And they'll say, sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. If they say, nope, we hold everything, we don't sell anything, I say, okay, great. Well, I have your criteria. But just to double check, there's nothing in your portfolio that's, kind of a pain in the butt property, nothing that you're having trouble getting leased up, nothing like that. And that just continuing to ask a few follow-up questions and keeping it just that conversational tends to open doors and open people to having a conversation that's not just a sales pitch, right? And sometimes they will. Sometimes they'll say, yep, actually, I do have that one over in, Salisbury that hasn't rented for a while. If somebody wants to buy that, I might sell that one. And then now the conversation's open and I can start to do what I need to do. And then in the meanwhile, I've now picked up another buyer because I can keep their criteria for later investments that do come up. So that's typically how I approach the scenario from an investor standpoint.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, a few systems you have there pertaining to capturing that information. So is it something like where, you say it's an industrial property, you say, we're really looking for properties in the 25,000 square foot to 50,000 square foot range, that have these types of tenants, maybe they're in this price point. Are those like tags that you put on these individuals so that, when you do get an opportunity, you can just do a search real quick and say, okay, in my CRM, how many people fall within this line, and you individually reach out to them to offer them the opportunity. Is that correct or no?
Absolutely. You can make a ton of different tags. So you have some people that want to buy retail and industrial in this. So, when I get a deal, if it's an industrial deal, I can sort through that industrial. Now I've got a tag that is, their budget's under $1 million now, and then maybe $1 million to $5 million, and then some that only buy north of 10. And so I have all those tags built in there. So whenever I get that property, I can quickly sort through and say, okay, I've had these conversations with these 13 people that said they want this type of asset. Now I can reach out to them with the asset. So that's typically how I go about it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And pertaining to the conversation, because another thing is when you do cold outreach and you don't necessarily have an agreement with someone because they don't want to sign a exclusive agreement, or with the landlord too, sometimes they're hesitant about signing any type of listing agreement. How do you approach that conversation when you do ultimately provide them with an opportunity to sell?
Yeah. So typically what I do is we utilize a couple different things. We have some non-exclusive agreements that we have that are limited representation agreements. And in a scenario in which if it's a difficult sale, and I know it's going to be a difficult sale, I always push for an exclusive agreement because we're going to take time. We're going to have to build a marketing package around this. We're going to have to do that. If it's a property that I know that there are buyers for, and it's a good deal and it's a good asset. You know, oftentimes I won't mind having that limited representation agreement, which basically says the seller can still sell it themselves. If somebody else comes along, they can still sell the property without paying me. But if I find the buyer, I've already pre-agreed my commission. We've already done all of our disclosures for, the real estate agency disclosures that pretty much every state has. And we've gotten all that stuff out of the way, but I've secured a commission, and I can now go to those, like I said, 13 people and say, hey, I've got a deal for you. Are you interested? And sometimes they won't pay, and sometimes they won't pay. And, that conversation shifts back to those investors. That is, look, I've got an asset. I'd love to put it in front of you, but the seller's not paying commission. Are you willing to? And if they are, then, we can go that way as well. And as long as there's disclosure there, most states have some sort of disclosure that you have to disclose to both parties to say who you're representing and who you're working for. So as long as, the number one rule in brokerage, disclose, then, we can try to find out who we're going to work for at that point. And if, again, unfortunately, sometimes, no one's willing to pay, and, you end up trying to find someone who will. So, just like any other business, we don't work for free. So we, that's why a lot of investors are willing to do it. I have a lot of conversations with private equity groups that very much upfront are very open about it. Look, I'll pay you X% if you bring me a good deal, and I'll sign on that before you give me the deal. If you say, hey, I got a good one for you, and, as long as I haven't seen the deal already, I'm happy to sign with you, So I like having those conversations. And obviously, just like in any business, if you have somebody that's willing to pay you, you're going to tend to lean towards those people, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's just important to note that that's the case, because, because you reach out to someone and someone may be interested in selling a property, if either party's not willing to pay, then, obviously that puts you as a broker in a unique situation that, is tough sometimes. So, that's why I think your efforts to talk to so many different people, to have that conversation up front about, their ability to, if I bring you this opportunity, would you be willing to cover the commission if in fact the seller for some reason is unwilling to do so? Again, the disclosure piece is really important to kind of disclose.
Absolutely.
And it can be an uncomfortable conversation at times, but when you're talking about sophisticated investors, those individuals understand. Like they most of the people understand
100%.
that you're not going to work for free. And hopefully if you bring them a really good enough deal, I mean, the commission is not a big deal for them. So
Absolutely.
So, oh yeah. Go ahead, Logan.
No, absolutely. And I've had scenarios where, I've had those conversations with those folks in advance. And then I found an exclusive opportunity, and I have to tell that buyer, say, hey, look, I'm still bringing this to you, but just so you know, I represent the seller in this scenario, and they don't care. They're sophisticated. They're used to that. And they're like, okay, great. We just want the deal. We just want to see the deal. So
absolutely. No, great advice. So as far as the cadence of follow-up, because obviously, as what they say, like 80% or 90% of phone calls go to voicemail a lot of times, especially if it's a number they don't recognize. So I guess, what is your cadence of follow-up? And I guess when you do reach out, are you switching it up periodically, or is it one of those things where, sometimes there's two schools of thought. They think, one, leave a voicemail, the other, just don't leave a voicemail. But what do you think as far as that's concerned? And then I guess, what's the cadence of follow-up?
Yeah. So I'll categorize those in two different categories. So people who I've already spoken with, who may have given me some sort of hint that they might want to sell in the future. I'll typically kind of feel that by the conversation. If I get the vibe that they say, especially if they say, hey, look, call me back in 2 weeks, I'll be ready then I'm going to set an every 2 week follow-up. I'll probably set an every week and a half follow-up, because I've had enough deals where someone says, call me in a month, and I call them in 3 weeks and they've sold the property. So I typically shorten that time a little bit and just say, hey, look, I know you told me to call you in a couple of weeks from now. Just wanted to touch base, make sure everything's okay, see if there's anything I can do for you. And usually they're just fine with that. If that's more of a scenario where I've been given a definitive follow-up time. In scenarios in which I haven't, and I've gotten just kind of a warm lead with somebody, it may be every other week, it may be every month, and I'll put those in my CRM. And so kind of my daily routine is to go in and check those tasks before I go to cold call and cold outreach. I'll check all the follow-up tasks that I have set for myself for the day. So there may be 3 today, there may be 20 tomorrow, but those are the first people I call, and I do that follow-up with them. And then for the folks who are on those lists, I may have lists that have 2,000-3,000 people on them. So as I'm working through there, it's going to take me a while to get back around at the top. So oftentimes I'll just straight call through and just keep going and keep track of based on the last time I called and start with the fresh ones who I haven't spoken to. And I do leave voicemails. So I've had significant luck with folks calling back after leaving a voicemail. Sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's 3 weeks later. So I do like to leave voicemails. Some people don't. For me, since I am calling through such a large list of folks, I like to leave that voicemail because I may not get back to them for a month. And so I like to leave that voicemail just in case they do want to follow up. I do have them pre-programmed. So in the ring, the dialer that I use, it'll start dialing somebody. And if they pick up, great, we can have a conversation. If it goes to voicemail, I can click a button and it drops that voicemail and immediately starts dialing the next one. So I can pre-record those voicemails and then drop them. So it speeds up that process quite a bit, but I do like to leave voicemails.
That's awesome. I didn't know that actually, yeah, that's great. Cause that's one of the things that when I first started, it was, you took so much time to leave voicemails and everything else. And, like you said, I mean, if you're trying to hit through a list, it's important to kind of, make sure that actually works, but that's interesting. And then as far as go ahead, Logan.
No, like you said, especially if 80 to 90% of them go to voicemail. So I've had times where I've sat down and I've blocked out a time of, an hour to make 50 calls. And because the dialer is so fast and because almost all of them went to voicemail, I finished all those 50 dials and dropped, 40 voicemails in 25 minutes. And so it's a huge time savings there. I mean, even if you did that once a day, I mean, and for everyone listening, if you took once a day and spent a half hour to drop 40 voicemails, how much would your business grow?
Yeah. I mean, it's game changing.
You're going to get leads. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, you do that 5 days a week. If you talk about regular work week, maybe you could add a sixth day in there if you want to, but let's just say 5 days a week, 40 voicemails, that's 200 a week. I mean, 800 a month, even if you get a 5% callback, I mean, that's still pretty solid.
That's a lot of calls.
40 calls, 40 conversations. So, I mean, no doubt. I mean, that's amazing insights that you shared regarding that. So as far as the systems that you implement, we kind of alluded to that. Can you kind of share maybe what CRM you use and then maybe some of the dialer that you mentioned and any other systems that you think would be pertinent for us as far as, listeners?
Sure. Yeah. So I currently use Zoho CRM, and I think I'm going to be transitioning to Pipedrive. I've messed around with Pipedrive a little bit, and I really like the simplicity of it. And so I think I'm going to be utilizing that. We've talked a little bit, Raphael, offline about Monday.com. I use Monday.com to kind of manage my listings and anyone who I'm, kind of starting that process of underwriting the property and moving them through the listing procedure. And Pipedrive integrates really well with Monday.com. So I'm looking at making that switch. So I really like that. And my dialer is ring.io. is the one I use, and it's a Google plugin. It's a Chrome plugin, and so it's actually kind of nice because you can utilize it to attach to your CRM, and you'll export a list and you'll start dialing through that. And like I said, it will take all of your notes and take all of your call logs and re-import them back into your software, so you don't have to make any double entry. But it also attaches right to your Chrome browser. So as you're looking through anything, a spreadsheet, a document, anything online, you can click right on that and it'll immediately start dialing through your phone. So as you're on your desktop, it'll immediately start dialing through. So I kind of like that. I like the plugin. I have used one called Phone Burner before, which I liked as well, but it was a pricing thing. The ring.io I found to be about half the cost. So with both of them being, servicing me as I need, I chose to go with the one that was a little less expensive.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I guess as pricing is concerned, is it like a monthly fee or a annual fee, or I guess you can probably.
I think Ring was a monthly fee. I think it was a monthly. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I think both of them actually were monthly fees.
Awesome. That's great.
And I think Ring was around $60 or $70 a month, and Phone Burner, when I was using it, was around $150. So, for $60 a month, if you can burn through 50 calls in 30 or 40 minutes and drop a lot of voicemails, it seems well worth it.
Definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. So I guess another thing that's kind of curious is you alluded to other efforts along with the calling side of things. Are there any other methods that you think that you employ that are also effective in generating potential leads?
Absolutely. So I like to follow up with people in a lot of different ways. If something is, if I'm just calling through blanketly, I'm calling through, as I said, if I've got voicemail, so if I have 2,000 phone numbers, emails, if I have 2,000 phone numbers, I may have, 6, 7, 800 really good emails out of that. And I'll take those and put them into an email campaign as well. And I use a service called Mailshake, and you're able to, it's just Mailshake, Mailshake. And I'll upload those. I can create different campaigns. I can turn them off and turn them on, and I can add sequencing to those campaigns to sequence through. Once the campaign's run its course, I can add more messages on the end of it and immediately start sending back to those. It keeps track of who unsubscribed, so I don't have to do any of that. It keeps track of all of those things. It's got a lead capture function on there as well. So if anybody does respond, it'll capture all those in the lead function. So it keeps track of statistics as well, really well, on a dashboard of how well your campaigns are doing. There's some A/B testing you can do with it. I haven't gotten into that too much, but I really like Mailshake for email follow-up. And then if there's somebody, out of that 2,000, if I've got 700 that I've got voicemail or emails for, and let's say I've got 200 or 300 that I really, really think are great opportunities, or really match well, I'll try to find them on LinkedIn as well if I can, and inbox them and try to connect on LinkedIn just to try to touch as many points as I can. And then I also keep a stack of envelopes and stamps beside my desk for anybody that I can't reach. If I know I've found the owner of a property and there's no contact info out there, and I know it's potentially a good deal, I don't mind writing a handwritten letter and dropping it in the mail to somebody. That I usually reserve that for if I'm not able to get a hold of somebody, but those tend to be pretty effective actually.
They're very, yeah. I've done campaigns like that as well, where I've handwritten like a quarterly template where I send to certain targeted individuals and buildings, and it works.
Yep.
It can work for sure. And one thing I wanted to kind of touch on as well was related to the text piece, because that's another thing that's people there's two different schools of thought on it, like whether or not texting is worth implementing or not. Have you had any experience with that, or would you have any comments on that?
I have, and for me, I don't use it a lot simply because of TCPA compliance. There's so much gray area around that subject, and I just the kind of the three schools of thought, just the three baseline areas that we talked about: calling, emailing, and texting. When you're calling, you should check the do not call list. If they're on the do not call list, just don't call them. It's not worth it. If you're emailing, you have to have an unsubscribe link on there, and if you're texting, technically, as far as I understand, please talk with your attorneys and talk with a TCPA compliance attorney. But from my understanding, technically, they have to have opted in to receive mass text messages. Now, there are certain services out there that discuss, they send them, but they send them one off at a time to get around that. And for me, it's always just been a more of a gray area that, the effectiveness of what I've been doing has been relatively effective. So until I get some more information, until I'm comfortable, I've decided not to pursue that avenue.
Yeah, and I haven't really had a lot of effort on that front either, so I couldn't really comment either. But I've gotten I'm on some local wholesalers, for example. They utilize that a lot here, and I'm
100%.
assuming they subscribed to some sort of mass campaign on their front. And like you said, there is a lot of gray area, because I've definitely gotten mass text before that. I don't know how the heck they got, my number and they're doing the mass text, but it's one of those things that, just thought I'd ask, because it is something that people do utilize. So, as far as,
I think it's a great thing.
Go ahead, Logan.
I think it's highly effective. No, it's okay. It's highly effective. I mean, for those who I know who have used it, I know it's highly effective. And if you do have a list of, folks who have opted in and have agreed to accept, that type of messaging, then I mean, we're all moving towards text. I mean, if you just imagine your everyday life, more and more people are texting and not picking up the phone to make a call. So it can be very effective. But for me, it's just a matter of wanting to be sure I'm compliant.
Yeah, no, and I mean, with the volume that you're doing as far as prospecting is concerned, all it takes is one or two people to just be, difficult about it, and then it could cause issues. So I definitely don't blame you for not wanting to go down that track. But as far as the other piece regarding resources, so as far as people out there, so if they're looking to implement this into their business and they want to be as effective as possible, what type of resources would you recommend that they utilize? And maybe just through your efforts of reading, or maybe some webinars or meetups or anything that you've done that you think really added some value that could be of value to
Yeah.
our audience?
Yeah, Fanatical Prospecting is a book by Jeb Blunt. I love that book, and it's kind of the kick in the pants of, like, if you want to be successful, you got to get over your fears type of book. I love that book. All of the systems and softwares that we talked about have, almost everyone has 100, 200, 300 YouTube videos out there, either from the company themselves or from users who are doing reviews and doing demos. So, if you want to learn about any of those softwares, check that out. You can also just do a simple Google search or a YouTube search, best CRMs for commercial real estate, and you'll get 1,000 videos that pop up, and you can go through and kind of see which one you like the best. Different people have different ways they like to interact. And so I think you can kind of get a good idea of the flow of the website and the software to see which one you like best. So I spend a lot of time on YouTube. I do listen to some podcasts. There's a few that I really like. Again, the Jeb Blunt podcast. Jeb Blunt has a podcast, and it is called, give me one second. His podcast is the Sales Gravy podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I listen to that one quite a bit. There's another one called Blissful Prospecting that I listen to as well. And both of those I really like, because they're basically about sales outreach or prospecting outreach. So if anybody's looking to learn more about prospecting, I highly recommend those two podcasts to listen to.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I was curious about asking as well is related to, the time you set aside to, number one, prospect, and then also work on your business. We talked about, this is one of the things that, we are independent contractors, but we do run our own independent business. So, how much time do you typically allocate towards prospecting and also building the systems that support whatever your business development efforts are?
Yeah. So when you're just getting started, there's going to be this large chunk of time up front to get this stuff situated, and you're just going to have that, and you're going to have less time to do the actual prospecting. But I'm at the point now where I typically I'll try to time block about 2 hours a day for prospecting if I can. If it's a busy day, I'll try to time block 1 hour, but I try to set that 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock hour as kind of an hour that cannot be messed with. It has to be for prospecting if I can. And if that gets moved because a client wants to meet or so on and so forth, or anything in the course of business changes that, that I have to be at, then my number one priority is to allocate that hour somewhere else. And like I said, as I'm using the dialer, I can call relatively quickly through these. So an hour I can get a lot done. It changes a little bit when I'm dealing with, if I'm calling on businesses, because usually there's a secretary that answers every time, or there's a receptionist, and it takes a little bit more time than just pounding through the list. But I try to set at least that hour aside every day. And then I'll try to set at least maybe an hour or two every day for progressing my business forward, working on my business, and not just in it, not just handling, listings or handling, marketing content, so on and so forth. So it doesn't always work out that way from the system side of it. So for me, I try to think about what's going to move the needle in my business more than anything. And I know for me, the more conversations I can have with the owners of properties, the more business I can do. And so I prioritize that over everything. And I know that if I don't keep that pipeline full, it's eventually going to dry up. So that for me is priority number one. Priority number two are my clients, and making sure that they're taken care of. And then priority number three is making sure that I can actually get done what I need to get done in terms of creating new systems and making my systems more efficient.
Phenomenal insight, really. Great. Well, I wanted to kind of give us some flexibility near the end of the meeting to allow for our audience to ask questions if they have any questions in particular, or maybe a little bit more granular that you'd like to ask. I'll be checking the chat box here on Zoom. And then we are live on LinkedIn as well. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you all who are watching, if you have any insights, we'll go ahead and ask Logan. All right, I'm checking LinkedIn. In the meantime, Logan, did you have anything that you think would be of value to the audience that maybe I just didn't ask you?
That's a good question. I do. I think that, especially if you've never done any sort of cold calling before, I always relate it to going to the gym, right? And if you've not gone to the gym and you're just starting a new gym membership, and you go day one and work out for 3 hours, you're not going back for a week because you're sore, you're tired, you're not, the next day you're going to wake up, you were motivated day one, you're going to wake up day two and you're going to be like, man, I really don't want to do that again. That's 3 hours of my time. So much like that, I recommend starting small. So if you go to the gym for 15 minutes the first time and just hop on the treadmill and walk and leave, it's really easy to get up and do that the next day. Or if you're working out from home and you get up and just walk around your neighborhood, it's really easy to continue that level of activity. And it's the same thing with cold calling. So if you're just starting, I wouldn't recommend blasting through 100, 200 calls in a day because you're going to get burned out very quickly. I would build that muscle. So I would say, today I'm going to make 5 calls. Maybe tomorrow I'll make 6, or maybe 5 is enough. Maybe 5 for the whole week because you're just terrified of it. So this week I'm going to make 5 calls. Next week I'm going to make 6 calls. And before long, if you build that way, you'll be to the point where you've had enough conversations and you're confident and you can just sit down there and blast through it. And that also gives you time to build your systems. Like I said, at the outset, you're going to spend a lot of time setting those systems up. So you may not have as much time to call, but just so you're making some progress, start small, make sure that you get those reps in, and then you can build as you go. If you've worked for a telecommunications company or telemarketing and you're used to being on the phone all day, maybe you can just jump right in. But if you haven't and that scares you a lot, that's how I would recommend getting over that.
Definitely great advice. So Saif, he asks, where do you get the CRE leads from, like contact information for property owners? I think you alluded to it at the beginning, but I'd like to.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So there's several different services. Reonomy is great. I really like Reonomy. There's another one that I haven't used. It's called Prospect Now. That is another commercial real estate database. CoStar is another one that you can utilize where you can pull properties and ownership data. And then you can use, like I said, you can hire somebody from Fiverr. I just hired a gentleman to pull a list of various different industry or companies that operate in various different industries around one of my listings in Florence, South Carolina. Said I want these types of people because I think they may be interested in this property. So you can do that, and they'll pull business owners, business names, email addresses, phone numbers, all that fun stuff. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. You could either subscribe to those systems, or you can hire someone who has access to that data to build you a list.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you're trying to do some of the research yourself, a lot of times like the local assessor's office is going to have a lot of information that you can garner regarding who the ownership group is. And, the people who own real estate, a lot of times they'll own it with a corporation. So you can go to the Secretary of State website and look through the principals to see who the owners of the corporation are that own the real estate. And then you can do back searches on those individuals to, pull contact information. So, I mean, that's kind of how I started out when I first started, because I didn't have access to any of those sites. So I just went, it was very cumbersome and long, but again, that's the process you take. And, Fast People Search is a free site. The phone numbers there are okay, but 50% hit rate maybe. But if you don't have the resources to do it right off the bat, it's a good starting point. So
absolutely, and there's a lot of different opportunities out there to sift through those. So like I mentioned, the do not call list. I think it's just dnc.com. There's a service that I've used that will allow you to sort through those. So if you have 1,000 numbers, it'll say, okay, these 300 on the DNC list, and out of the 700 that are left, they'll send a ping to make sure it's a good number. And then there may be 400 after that are left. So it saves you some time from calling through all those numbers that are no good. But Raphael, that's great advice. So many of these businesses, or so many of these owners are through our businesses, their LLCs, their corporations, so what have you. So looking through the Secretary of State site, if you can't get that information, that's where LinkedIn can be super helpful. If they've got a consumer, an outward facing brand that you can get a hold of through LinkedIn, then that's a great way to get a hold of that contact information. You may just have to contact them through there.
Yeah, no, great advice, really. All right, so Blake, hey Blake, he asks, what other resources would you recommend for vetting potential clients and properties, i.e. lease expiration, CMBS data, et cetera?
Yeah, so potentials, like for me personally, I like to look for a couple of different options. One, tenanted properties, because that's where a lot of the folks who I work with are looking for. But sale leasebacks, I work with a lot of sale leasebacks, so I look for properties that are owned and operated by a business. That the business is operating in that area. So for me, I can sort through those different filters, Reonomy and CoStar, and find those people to specifically go after it. But if you're just starting out, find out what the buyers want, and then go find that. That's the simplest way I could put it to sort for those things. So if buyers say, hey, look, I want something with, I want at least 3 years left on the lease, or I want at least 7 years left on the lease. There may be a little bit more manual work to find that stuff out, because that may not be something that's public record. So you may have to do a little bit more digging via, maybe calling the most recent broker. Maybe they'll give you the information, maybe they won't, or if the owner will give you that information. I've had owners that'll, the second I get them on the phone, they want to tell me everything about their property. But trying to find that information in advance is sometimes difficult. So I just try to set myself up for success as best I can by understanding first what my clients want, and then trying to sort for those things.
Yeah, great advice. And you even mentioned like the barrier when you first talk to someone. If you come at the conversation saying, "What can I do for you? How can I find something for
Mm-hmm.
you?" Then that
Yeah.
obviously most of the time at least brings the guard down a little bit. So that's a very
Yeah.
very smart way to approach the process.
Yeah, and from the business owner that owns and operates out of the business, it's very similar. But I'll just offer, hey, I'm sure you're aware the market has gone up, and industrial is wild right now. If you ever want any information on the market, and what places are going for on $1 per square foot rate, or what places are leasing for, if you ever have any spare space, I'd be happy to give you that information for free. And sometimes a lot of them want to know, yeah, I want to know what my place is worth. That's a pretty common thing for any business owner or property owner to want to know what their property's worth. So that's a very quick in to provide value right up front and potentially get a meeting. Hey, I pulled that information. Can I bring it into you next Tuesday? And that's a great way to kind of break down those barriers.
Absolutely. Great advice, man. Really. All right. So I'll check LinkedIn real quick just to make sure we don't have any questions. But I think, you provided a lot of insight today. So I think that, a lot of people gain some value from it.
Good.
All right. It looks like we are all done as far as the questions are concerned. So Logan, thanks so much for stopping by. I really do appreciate your time, and I'm glad we were able to get this this meeting, and hopefully the people who are listening today got some value from it. As far as if people wanted to learn more about you, obviously you're an up and coming influencer in the commercial real estate space. So I would highly encourage you guys to follow him on all the different social platforms, on LinkedIn, YouTube, et cetera. But if people wanted to get in contact with you to learn a little bit more about what you're doing, or if any business owners are listening and they're in their area and they want to potentially talk to you about any type of opportunities that they may have, how would they get in contact with you?
Sure. Absolutely. They can, you can, again, you said reach out to me on all the channels. I'm on LinkedIn. If they're on LinkedIn, they can message me there. Feel free to reach out to me. If it's not a business thing and maybe you just have a question, you can reach me on my personal email. It's just my first and last name and the number 1 at gmail.com. If it is business related, my email is Logan at Costello REI. That's COSTELLOREI.com. I do have the True Commercial Real Estate podcast. It's a group that gets together twice a month, and it's primarily a mastermind and networking group, but we ultimately end up hosting someone to talk once a month. So you can follow us on YouTube there, check out some of the folks we've had on there, and it's a great time. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me in any of those mediums.
Oh, for sure, man. No, and we'll include all that information in the show notes below. So if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it'll be in the description. And if you guys are watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever else, it'll be in the description as well, so you guys can access that. So again, Logan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for tuning in for this edition of the Commercial Real Estate 101 podcast, and we'll see you all next time. See you guys.